so I may need that to get people's attention. Okay, so welcome to LSUS Shreveport, and we're glad you made it, and the audience will fluctuate in terms of numbers over the days. I just want to say a couple things, take a couple minutes. We have 18 people from 18 different states and 2 different countries. I'm not a historian, I'm a political scientist, and we gather data. And about half the conference are historians, half are political scientists. I didn't count on that item, but that's more or less how it turns out. Breaking that data down, so that's what you have to do, as you poli-sci people know. There's 2 from the Northeast, 8 from the 6 or 8 from the South, 8 from the Midwest, including a person from North Dakota, where they have a Teddy Roosevelt Center.
You talk to me later.
Okay, and she brought some stuff. We were so cheap because we had to keep getting our budget cuts. I don't have free pens for you, but she brought free pens.
I proudly provide pens. Help yourself to them.
They're over on the tables in the other room. 3 people from the West, nobody from the left coast, where I am, so I have to represent the Oregon. And then 1 person from the Southwest who's not here yet. Okay, so you're asking about where the international people are from. We have 1 from Italy who's not here yet, and then 1 person from Kurdistan who's over there, who's going to be presenting a paper on Saturday. He's the youngest. He's an undergraduate here. I'm the oldest. I'm 85 years old, and I'm almost 125 now. I now know why there's only 2 presidential conference series in the country. All you have to do is organize 1 presidential conference, or any conference for that sake, and you'll never do it again. So, but we keep doing it. I think this is our 10th conference, and to prepare yourself, since some of you are slower than others, some of you are retired or semi-retired, the next conference in 3 years in October will be on great legislators and or great pieces of legislation. And for those of you who are actually on the program, you have this $27 thing. I didn't know about the cost until after it was printed. The next to the last page is all for papers. So I expect some proposals by the end of the 3rd day in here. Okay. And considering the current condition of the Congress, there should be a lot of papers. Okay. And I'm going to just briefly say that people who go to conferences, you know there's 2 types of people. There are first-time innocent sorts who have never been to a conference before, or perhaps never been to Louisiana before, and you're totally lost. That's why you have the vacant seats here. And then there are what social scientists call repeat players. You repeat players know what the conference game is all about, so I don't pay any attention to you repeat players. But for you innocent first-timers, if you're not having fun, come see me, because my nickname is Dr. Fun. And I will make sure that your life improves. Okay, so that's that introduction. And then the very short introduction, because I'm taking up this time, is our speaker today, who is a hybrid from South Dakota and Pennsylvania. And I hate to say this about him, but he's been a bureaucrat for 25 years, so he's questionable. His co-author is stuck in South Dakota right now at the, what's it called, the Center for Leadership. He was here 3 years ago, Bill Richardson, and they both co-wrote a paper, and our presenter's name is John Soubik, and he's going to tell us about, this is a unique conference because we're actually talking about 3 presidents, both Roosevelts, and all the conferences have Abraham Lincoln as the standard against which to judge presidents by. So on Saturday morning, most of the papers are on, all the papers are on Lincoln, on Saturday morning. So he's going to be talking about, I think, all three of them. So Professor Soubik, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And do it any way you want.
Well, this is my first conference, so I'm one of the newbies. So unfortunately, I couldn't attend the last conference. I co-wrote a paper with Dr. Richardson last time, but unfortunately, I could not attend. So this is my first time. So I am delighted to be here at Louisiana State University, my first time in Louisiana. So I am anxious to try the local fare, so I plan on leaving here a little heavier than when I arrived last night. And also, I'm very appreciative to be part of the Roosevelt Century Conference and represent the University of South Dakota, where I did my graduate studies. And of course, as you know, it's located in a territory dear to the heart of one of our honorees, Theodore Roosevelt. Dr. Richardson unfortunately could not be here today, and he sends his regrets because he is hosting 3 speakers back at the University of South Dakota in Vermilion. So he does send his regrets, but he does wish that he could have been here. It is fitting that I thank Dr. Peterson for hosting these conferences time and time again, and those who support them financially and in kind, and of course all of you, the participants, and for what you contribute to political science and public administration. So thank you. I have had an affinity for anything presidential ever since I was a child. When I was a young boy, I collected sticker books. And those sticker books weren't of cartoons or animals or characters or spacecraft or anything like that. They were of the states and the presidents. And I still have those sticker books. They're a little yellowed by now. And also I have the newspapers emblazed with the headlines of presidential inaugurations or of a president passing. And I still cherish a book that my uncle, who lived in Texas as an Army sergeant, he sent me. It's called The Torch Has Passed, and it was about Kennedy's assassination, and it came out shortly after he was assassinated. It's a beautiful book, and I cherish that because, one, I have an affinity for Kennedy, but also because it was from my uncle, who I'm a namesake of. And also, I remember as a young boy standing in the spot where Theodore Roosevelt stood when he dedicated Pennsylvania's capital back in 1906. And at that site, he commented that it's the handsomest building he has ever seen. And it's relevant to me because my office is right across the street from that Capitol building. So I get to admire it and see it, and almost every day, and I get to visit the cafeteria almost daily. And of course, being close to Harrisburg, I get to go to the Gettysburg battlefields, where Lincoln gave his infamous Gettysburg Address. It's a hallowed site where you can still find the Civil War bullets in the fields. And I was just there with the American Society of Public Administration. We did a tour of the battlefields, and they were telling us that a few months prior, they were putting in a new railroad ties and rails there through Gettysburg, and the workers actually found the remains of a Confederate soldier while they were digging up the ties. And they knew that he was a Confederate soldier because of the remains of his uniform, and also what rank he was because of his emblems and things such as that. So even after all these years, you still find the memorabilia of that Civil War. Ironically, during my undergraduate years, I was a political science major for only one semester. My 2 apartment mates both graduated with degrees in political science, and I recall many of a night when they had their political debates. but political science just wasn't for me at that time. Now, nearly 30 years later, here I am presenting and attending a conference on the U.S. presidency. When I announced to Dr. Richardson that the topic I would like to write about for a conference that focused on the Roosevelts was Lincoln's connection to Theodore and Franklin, he heartily agreed. So our paper is entitled The American Character of Our Nation's First Presidents, Abraham Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And in it, we talk about Aristotle's perspective of leadership and connecting that with the three presidents, the leadership styles, and the use of executive orders and presidential power of these three presidents. And we end with a discussion of their personality and communication styles. Four running themes underlie our nation's first presidents. One, an understanding of the citizenry and the needs of the nation, a pragmatic approach to leadership, a connection with people, and a resilience to resolve to succeed. So allow me now to share with you some of the key passages that we include in the paper. Time and place influence who we are and who we become, in essence, our legacy. And one word among all others is symbolic of Abraham Lincoln. I'm sure you all know it. It's unity. Lincoln's rise to presidential power amid Civil War was focused on preserving a single sovereignty. And Lincoln knew that only in unity can a nation be great. And Theodore Roosevelt and Franklin Roosevelt each had to address some form of disunity during their presidency and had to work toward achieving that unity. And as such, they set forth an example of character and leadership in the American presidency and on the nation. All three put forth a nation-first resolve. Lincoln unified a divided nation. TR unified an expanding nation domestically on a global front. And FDR unified an economically depressed nation involved in the war on two fronts. These nation-first presidents embraced presidential power for the good, for the common good, and fought for the ordinary citizen, even though they had vastly different backgrounds. Lincoln's poverty-laden upbringing versus the affluent pedigree of the two Roosevelts. And because of who they were in history and the challenges put before them, all three engineered an underlying legitimate oneness of nation and demonstrated a staunch resolve to ensure that the nation stands despite its challenges. Lincoln's character, his prudence, and his heroic virtues spared a splintering nation and emancipated the enslaved. These two acts, along with his life's resiliency and his ultimate sacrifice, bolstered the man to what some have described as the greatest character since Christ. And Lincoln's apostolic successors, such as TR and FDR, succeeded by following their heroes' fortitude and preparing the nation for potential internal and external dangers. And all three of them shared similar personality traits, communication skills, but most importantly, a love of a united, strong, and lasting country. A Whig turned Republican, Lincoln's influence on TR, a Republican turned progressive, and FDR, a long-standing Democrat, was evident. In fact, FDR has been characterized as the Democratic Lincoln. And during the end of his presidency, TR remarked that his work had been to take hold of the Conservation Party and turn it into what it had been under Lincoln. And FDR also echoed TR's affection for Lincoln during his 1936 campaign. Now, reflecting back on Aristotle for a moment, he argues that a practically wise person rationally calculates well about what furthers some excellent end, and that practical wisdom is a true state involving reason, a practical one, concerned with what is good or bad for the human Aristotle further concludes that politicians are practically wise, for they understand what is good for themselves and for others. And of course, we can argue that point. And understanding forms the basis of practical wisdom, and temperance preserves that practical wisdom. Lincoln's approach to slavery was practical politicking. While Lincoln was willing to endure slavery for the sake of a united nation, he was clearly anti-slavery. But Lincoln was not always considered a savior, if you will, however. He wavered from Aristotle's standard with his 1862 support of deporting liberated slaves to Central America. And other acts of his brought condemnation as well, for Lincoln raised an army without congressional approval, suspended the writ of habeas corpus, allowed government tampering of private correspondence, and declared martial law. Now, Theodore Roosevelt's political meandering to take over the Panama Canal, or Panama territory, in order to build a canal from the Atlantic to the Pacific, was questionable to many and outright reprehensible to some. TR envisioned two great oceans connected not only by rail, but by water to benefit the Panamanian territory, America, and the world. And Colombia's defeat ended its interest in the Panamanian territory after the United States instigated the rebellion, opening the way for TR to act. But TR later acknowledged, however, that his actions in securing the Panamanian independence to build the canal were seen by many as improper. But how fortunate it was for the United States. Unknown to him at the time, Roosevelt's canal would serve well the United States during World War II, when his cousin sat as commander-in-chief. I wonder what TR would think now of the Panama Canal and how it has proliferated world trade, uniting not only the domestic coast-to-coast for the United States, but also international cargo transport. And having worked in the governor's office for nearly 25 years in Pennsylvania, and working closely with the Department of Transportation, where we also oversee shipping out of the Port of Philadelphia, it was very interesting for me to research and talk about the canal from my perspective. Similar to Lincoln and TR, FDR's questionable reforms to strengthen the economy and reinvigorate the nation during the Great Depression, along with the decisions for America to enter the World War on two fronts, were not only practical, but necessary to preserve the nation. And similar to his cousin Theodore, some political scholars characterized FDR as one of the most prudent presidents due to his action-positive character, while others, like James McGregor Burns, recognized the Machiavellian side of his personality, focused on his own political gains and interest in power. FDR was castigated for enacting the Japanese Exclusion Act and for his attitude toward African Americans and European Jews, which made his prudence questionable. But all three nation-first presidents had their own moral fiber challenged during some point of their presidencies. However, their fundamental focus was good over evil, peace over tyranny, and preservation over extinction. It is how a president reacts or prepares for a given circumstance within the context of time and place that results in success or failure. And it is a culmination of such actions, ultimately, that contributes to a president's greatness or demise. Abraham Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, and Franklin Roosevelt were masters at communication. They were master orators. And TR and FDR in particular embraced the advancing technology and thus increased the connection with the people, pioneering the rise of the celebrity presidency that reached out to the masses in order to gain extra constitutional support from the American citizens and also, if needed, of the world. not exactly a man of letters, Lincoln proved to be a great leader in large measure because of his steadfast beliefs about a union and the inclusive vision of American nationhood, so powerfully expressed in his exceptional use of the first-person plural. In his political ascendance, Lincoln knew that his nominations and elections resulted from party affiliations, and therefore rarely alluded to himself. In the collection of works of Abraham Lincoln, the pronoun we is used 12,000 times. In his second inaugural address, Lincoln used I once, and in the Gettysburg Address, none at all. Perhaps Lincoln's minimal formal schooling contributed to his success. His art of brevity led the way to resilience and endurance and the power of individualism. Psychologists Rubenzer and Foschenbauer described Lincoln as scoring high on achievement striving and openness to aesthetics. Following his rousing speech at Cooper Union, Lincoln received the Republican nomination for president. Lincoln was a president of the people, daily meeting with the ordinary citizens and often visiting the battlefields regardless of the dangers. And our psychologists further described Lincoln as approachable and folksy, and that his obvious concern for the well-being of the individual citizens would not be found in a popular president until FDR. Perhaps the appeal of Theodore Roosevelt was his so-called larger-than-life personality. He used his resources to ascend the political rungs with the belief that politicians could positively influence constituents and the nation, something that Aristotle proclaimed more than 2,000 years earlier. TR's flamboyant and demonstrative personality differed greatly from his forebear Abraham Lincoln. And his nephew remarked, he wanted to be the bride at every nation and the corpse at every funeral. It was rumored, too, that TR's publisher needed to order a special printing for more capital I's for each new manuscript. And TR's speeches were littered with superlatives such as, that was bully. Like Lincoln's humorous side, although one wouldn't really know it from the photographs that we see, TR expressed great joy, unabashed about physically jumping for joy, unable to control his emotions. And Rubenzer and Foschenbauer scored TR with a high combination of extreme extroversion, high conscientiousness, and high morals that has not been found in any other president. Although his acquisition of the Panamanian territory to build the canal achieved him low points on U.S. international morality. Moving ahead, the talking telegraph, or radio, achieved its golden age in the 1930s, when it became affordable and available to the American family. After all, who doesn't like to listen to a story? FDR was able to capitalize on these talking telegraphs with his fireside chats. These chats not only allowed FDR to enter the living rooms of the American people, but also into the family atmosphere itself. Grandparents, parents, and children would host the American president, though maybe have been his voice, into their homes. And FDR realized the power of this technology and capitalized on its influence. Through radio, FDR's speeches were not reconstructed by the press. Americans heard the words and emotions directly from the president. In fact, these first-hand accounts guided the press. The press could not filter or spin FDR's words, so the American people heard them directly from the source. FDR knew that the power of the press and of this new technology could bolster the American spirit. He forged relationships with the reporters that resulted in a mutual respect. These positive relationships with both the press and, more importantly, with the American citizens, the voters themselves, allowed FDR to persuade Americans in favor of his provocative social programs to combat the Great Depression and also to go to war in Asia and Europe. During these chats and other speeches, FDR and referred to his listeners as friends and repeatedly used the word we, opposite of Abraham Lincoln, which invoked to him a oneness among the American people and the mindset that individuals were not alone in these challenges. Radio not only provided the words, but also the tone, the inflection, and the emotion of the president. Hearing these were as important as hearing the words themselves. This great communicator helped propel America into a world power, and he changed the political landscape by giving more public focus on the president than Congress. When popular child actress Shirley Temple was asked if he liked the president, she replied that she did, because he starts all of his radio talks with "my friends." And upon his death, one soldier remarked, "I felt as if I knew him. I felt as if he knew me. And I felt as if he liked me." In conclusion, then, Lincoln calls us to unity. TR calls us to duty. And Franklin Roosevelt calls us to activism. Each of our nation-first presidents are memorialized in countless monuments, dedicated buildings, and literary works. But what is it that causes Abraham Lincoln to be such an inspirational American figure? And what causes him to be such a prominent influence on subsequent presidents like TR and FDR? Abraham Lincoln personifies the American character in his written expression, his oration, his leadership, embodying the essence of an American sage. Lincoln, the man and political figure, melded with the characters of both Roosevelts. How could TR and FDR not be influenced by the man's strength, both physical and political, his character, his fortitude and resolve, and finally, his sacrifice? Lincoln forged the nation on a new path to resiliency, endurance, and power, and raised it as an example in the eyes of the world. Theodore Roosevelt's fully pulpit approach differed greatly from his iconic Lincoln, yet the essence of TR's and Lincoln's hearts aligned. Despite his rough exterior, TR's 1905 inaugural address resonated his and Lincoln's interior, with TR even referencing Lincoln toward the end of his talk. He said, "Toward all other nations, large and small, our attitude must be one of cordial and sincere friendship. We must show not only in our words, but in our deeds, that we are earnestly desirous of securing their goodwill by acting toward them in the spirit of just and generous recognition of all their rights." TR's basis for national greatness began with sound family resources and values. Roosevelt recognized that the American creed was not a question of birth, rather it was a resolve of, quote, spirit, conviction, and purpose, unquote. Like Lincoln, TR recognized that there is no place for division. There are two demands upon the spirit of Americanism, of nationalism, he said. Each must be met. The first is that we shall tolerate no kind of divided allegiance in this country. The second is that we must treat every good American equally with every other good American. And TR practiced a strenuous life with virtue and patriotism in pursuit of what he called realizable ideals. This reversal of service to country is also likened to Franklin Roosevelt, who so generously outlaid to the citizens in need with his New Deal and involvement with the war. One scholar is quoted as saying, if Lincoln is the greatest architect of federal powers in the 19th century, then FDR is of the 20th century. And like Lincoln, FDR met the challenge of disunity, but in a different way than Lincoln. FDR's challenge was not a splintered nation as it was a splintered economy. FDR knew that he needed to save capitalism before he could save democracy. And he enacted a proliferation of executive orders and acts, reestablished trust in the banking system, nearly double-sized the Navy, and used the presidency as the stage to reach the American people. FDR went so far as to legalize alcohol to lift the spirits of the Americans, voters and non-voters alike. And Roosevelt's Lincoln-esque style served him well. By embracing the technology of the times and the advancing technology, TR and FDR increased their connection with the people, pioneering the rise of the so-called celebrity presidency that reached out to the masses in order to gain extra constitutional support from the American citizen and of the world. In conducting this paper, in conducting the research for this paper, I came across the letters of John Jay, the lost founding father that we rarely hear about. In those papers, I found that Jay held the same ideals as our nation's first presidents on unity, slavery, and national power. In fact, Jay was actually the anti-slavery president here in America. In his role as Minister of Foreign Affairs, the precursor to the Secretary of State, Jay wrote in 1785 in a letter to James Lowell, in which he commented on the feeble state of our federal government. And in it, Jay stated, "It is my first wish to see the United States assume and merit the character of one great nation." This exclamation came 80 years before Lincoln's challenge to unify the divided nation. I wonder what Jay would think now of our nation's first presidents and how they managed the challenges that were put before them. There is no president, or political figure for that matter, who is without criticism. But it is that culmination of behavior, of acts and accomplishments that solidify a leader's legacy. Surely Abraham Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, and Franklin Roosevelt not only recognized the American character, but exemplified it by putting our great nation first, above individual needs, and asked that the citizens do so. So, united, this character will benefit present and future generations for years to come. I thank you for your attention, and I welcome your comments. Then I can use those to modify our paper. And I also look forward to hearing all of your talks and reading your papers as well. And just as a last remark, as for my political science roommates, if you're interested in knowing what happened to them now, one is a defense attorney for special cases, and the other one is a Catholic priest, after having been very successful in the retail business. So I guess you could say that both stayed in politics, but their higher calling just has a little different judge. Thank you, and I look forward to, I think we have some time for some questions. Yes, we do. Yes?
Can you repeat the name of the paper?
Yes. It is called Our Nation First Presidents.
Okay.
Abraham Lincoln, Roosevelt, Franklin Delano.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Hey, John. You mentioned that the Panama Canal incident gave low points to international morality for Teddy Roosevelt, and I guess you could add to that Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine as well. But I'm wondering if we can say something nice about him. He does help negotiate the Treaty of Portsmouth, which ends the horrible, horrible bloodshed in the Far East. Maybe you can think more positively upon his form?
Well, actually, the paper does go into the positive aspects. I just wanted to give the opposite of what Aristotle was saying with prudence. But we do talk about him achieving getting the Nobel Peace Prize and all of that. So the paper is much lengthier in terms of the leadership. But yes, that is in there, but thank you for that. Yes?
Considering all three personalities, I've always felt that Lincoln and FDR were natural. If they had been politicians, they were very much people.
Exactly.
And they're very good at reading. I always thought Teddy Roosevelt wasn't so good at that because he spent most of his career educating his own party, even after he was president.
Right.
And some of the stories suggest that if it hadn't been for the San Juan Hill episode, that he probably never would have been president. He sort of took over the convention that year.
Right.
What do you think about that? Because he always sort of bowls over people rather than reading individual personalities.
Yeah, in researching the psychological aspects of those three, yeah, he definitely had a much different personality than either Lincoln or FDR. Because, as I said, they were more of the people and concerned about the people. I think FDR also was concerned. It just, Teddy was also concerned. It just, his personality style made it so that it didn't come across that way. So I think he was genuinely concerned. It's just that the way he presented himself, the appearance wasn't there for that.
Or you could make the argument with that anarchist that they were vice president, right?
I don't know. I think they're getting very worried that he would, after the second term, that Roosevelt would take over the party because there's national popularity.
I do have one more thing. Well, I'm actually doing a paper on the Panama Canal right now, and even though the Roosevelt may have had his pros and cons to his reasoning behind the Panama Canal, but he is what led Panama, with his help, Panama separated from Colombia and became their own nation.
Right.
So regardless of his negative reasons, they also had great pro reasons as well.
Yeah.
So because of him, in 1904, they were able to declare themselves an independent nation from Colombia.
And we talk about that in the paper, that at the time it had those negative connotations.
Absolutely.
But now, and I have a wonderful article that I can share with you, being in the transportation business now.
Okay.
It's a journal that we received, and the whole article is on the Panama Canal. It's just fascinating.
That would
So
be
I can
wonderful.
share that with
I
you.
appreciate that.
But yeah, he had no idea what the canal would do now for the world.
Absolutely.
And it's still, increasing with the size and the scope because of the Panamax ships that are so huge.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, they're expanding it. So yes, it's a fascinating story. It really is. Except at the time, it looked like he orchestrated the whole deal.
Correct.
But in the end, it really turned out to be good. So, from an Aristotle perspective, is what he did worthy of the credit?
And in 1999, the U.S. relinquished any and all rights to the Panama Canal.
Exactly. So it's theirs. Exactly.
Absolutely.
So it really was a win-win, but it just took 100 years.
But we still have that connection to them. It's even the Panama Canal and Roosevelt. It's mentioned in their Constitution.
Exactly.
So I just think it's wonderful.
They use the dollar too, by the way.
Yes, they do. I know that they have different monarchs or whoever you want to call on their money, but they use the U.S. dollars. Their coins are very similar.
So this article, it was fascinating. It talks about the whole history of what it was like prior to the canal.
Oh, okay.
And it talks about modern day, the mega ships that need to go through there. So I'll definitely share that with you.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Well, the tendency on writers on TR is to condemn his post-presidential years, bombastic, legalistic, and so forth.
Which I don't agree with, but
I
yeah.
don't either, you see.
Yeah.
He was certainly not a civil liberties absolutist, but as Kathleen Galton points out, a major force for restraint on Woodrow Wilson's authoritarian policies after the First World War. Writers have totally ignored it or been unaware of it, but Nation magazine once heralded him with the headline, "Why is Roosevelt unjailed?" And he dared Wilson to jail him. And were it not for TR, it's quite likely that Wilson's absolute policy would have been worse than that.
I mean, I just find it absolutely fascinating. The first paper that I wrote with Dr. Richardson a few years ago, I just was absorbed by the whole Theodore Roosevelt arc. I took a ride to New York City to his homestead, and I was fascinated by the shirt and his speech that the bullet was still there, you know, and I just can't get enough of this.
Well, it's interesting how the personalities of some figures can seduce, if you will, the writers.
Yeah.
In your case, in my case also, TR, I approached him initially with great skepticism. But look at Robert Cairo and how he made his first two volumes absolutely savage, where he made really not very good history. And I put off reading the third volume because I was, even though he's an excellent writer and so forth, I found his taste in politics is superb, nuance and so forth, both of them. Just point on some of the best things I've written about it. And I think he essentially was caught up in the end personality of THEODORE the way you and I was in the rest of the time.
Yeah, like Arthur Lincoln, Woodrow Wilson. What was that? Like Arthur Lincoln, Woodrow Wilson. Yes, sir.
I'm going to ask you a question if you could divert a little bit. There's so much that has been written about Lincoln and race. And you mentioned the fact that what you wanted to do was set up a colony outside the United States. We know that, and that was, you got told in no uncertain terms by Frederick Douglass and all the other prominent blacks that was not acceptable and that wasn't going to happen. But obviously he foresaw the terrible problem we've had to this day in handling the race problem in this country, dealing with race. Also, TR had a problem as well. And I don't know if he ever changed his views that the only people who could rule the world were Anglo-Saxons.
Yeah.
But he may have. I mean, in reading his book the book about the river of no return, it seems like he changed his views of dark-skinned people who helped him during that trip and so on and so forth. But can you comment on those things?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because in our research, I found that as well, that he was questionable in terms of how he viewed minorities and things such as that. But I never did get to what his true stance was. I haven't been able to find that yet.
I mean, finally. And we know what his stance was earlier in life. I mean,
right,
the
yeah.
only ones who could run the world were Anglo-Saxons, period.
Right. But I don't know if he ever
changed.
If he ever changed. I mean, does anyone know?
No, but I want to sort of follow up in legacy. As a political scientist, I have a harder time than perhaps some historians do in assessing legacy. But if we take a look at contemporary politics, there are very few Republican politicians today who would mention Abraham Lincoln. I don't know of any, in fact, of the contemporary presidential candidates who would mention Lincoln. They don't mention Teddy Roosevelt either, for that matter. I suppose opposed to FDR are slightly different because the Democrats still mention FDR. So in terms of legacies, I think you have to take also a broader view and say, well, what is the impact today? And certainly on the race issue, you say, well, whatever Lincoln did, he certainly didn't resolve it.
Right.
And I still remember as a kid, one of the real differences when I first came down south, we used to have Lincoln as a holiday when I was growing up in New York.
And in
Well, it
Illinois.
certainly wasn't in the South a holiday ever. And I dare say, if we took a look at unity has a impact in the future, one would be hard pressed to say that these politicians back then had an impact which continues today.
Right.
Except perhaps for FDR.
I agree.
But isn't Lincoln's greatness the fact that Lincoln's greatness the fact that he could change his views? I mean, isn't that why historians love him so much? Is that he grew.
Yeah, I think from my understanding, I mean, he didn't take a hard line and he never changed. And I think he was accommodating those views.
Which is so different from today's politicians, right?
Right.
You change your mind even when you point out that they're wrong.
I think that's the answer with TR as well. I mean, I think that you don't have a final solution to how TR is going on race because I think it's ever evolving. We know that it was ever evolving from some of the stories that we have. And so, did he ever reach a notion of full equality? Probably not. But was he evolving toward that? I mean, remember, a guy who grew up in very advantaged circumstances and had never seen anyone of different ethnicity and different colors, probably at the time he became president, and yet he was the first to invite an African American to the White House for lunch. I mean, so it was ever evolving.
Good point, thank you.
Last 10-minute break.
Okay, this isn't quite accurate because he explained that his children went to school with black people and he found nothing wrong with it. TR certainly held racist views, but they weren't racist in the sense that you think of race as biological determinism. So he had no feeling, no sense that people of different races were genetically inferior to his culture in his view. The white, and he regretted using the term race, he felt it doesn't emphasize any validity, but the white culture, the white race, he said, had achieved things that others had not yet. But he was under no illusion that they always had been on top or always would be. And his great law of righteousness was always revealed to each person on the basis of what Dr. King would say the content of his character.
Right.
Not because of his. So it is racism, but it's a much more nuanced kind of racism.